All right, what's up, everyone? It's Zach, and today I'm here with a very special guest. I'm here with Savannah Fullmer. Savannah, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Good, I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. And yeah, of course, thanks for taking the time to be here. I'm super excited for the conversation today.
Yeah, I'm
S-
excited as well.
Awesome. So, for those of you listening back home, Savannah is someone that I've been very fortunate to know for quite a while. We met back at Central Michigan University, so she is a fellow Chippewa. Fire up, Chips.
Fire up chips.
I love it. So yeah, we met back there and really connected just over a lot of similar passions, whether that was sports or music, even some on an academic level, just kind of like being in like the more business realm, I guess you could say. Um, but that's a little bit about Savannah's interests right now. She is working as a senior business digital analyst, and also she is an entrepreneur. She recently started a Etsy called The Common Catholic. So that's a little bit about Savannah. But do you mind kind of giving us a little bit more about your background, who you are, what you're doing, all that good stuff?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm born and raised in Michigan. I guess like outer Metro Detroit. For people not from Michigan, they'd probably say I'm from Detroit, but when you live in Michigan, you know that's not the case.
Right.
Um, and grew up in the area, ended up, going to CMU where I met Zach. I pursued a business degree in marketing and information systems, and all the while was just big into like extracurricular activities. Zach and I both loved playing basketball. I enjoyed volleyball as well, and then we both play guitar and enjoy singing, so bonded over that. I ended up at Dow right after graduation, working in the IS rotational program. So within the IT department, I did two rotations there and then hired out into another internal role. It's kind of, fortunately for me, a nice mix of marketing and information systems that I got an education in, as a senior business digital analyst. So I work a lot with digital analytics, analyzing what customers are doing on the website, trying to help the marketers out, of how to design the website, how to get traffic coming in, that sort of thing. And then we just help with like any kind of digital initiative that Dow is trying to accomplish. Um, in my free time, I am really involved with our local church, St. Joseph in Lake Orion. I help lead the young adult group there. I did, yes, recently start an Etsy shop just in my free time, kind of as a hobby. I play pickup volleyball a couple days a week, and I'm recently engaged, so I'm doing a ton of wedding planning right now.
So I think the first question that comes right off the bat is like, how do you balance all your time?
Um, well, my chores get neglected a lot, to be totally honest.
Yeah.
Um, I think so part of the luxury of working from home, um and I'm like hoping my boss doesn't listen to this, but if you don't have a ton of work to do, you can kind of get some of those other things done. And so my job kind of ebbs and flows, where some weeks I'm really busy and other weeks, you're waiting on other people to get their tasks done. And so that gives me opportunities where, like, today on like lunchtime, I ran out and like did a florist appointment and that sort of thing. And then I like having common things in my schedule. So like Mondays and um now Tuesdays, because I'm in a league. So Mondays and Tuesdays are like my volleyball days. The young adult group, we like meet once a month and like plan an event or two for each month. So it doesn't feel that crazy when you do like smaller portions of everything. If I was like going to the gym every single day of the week and then you're like trying to meal prep and all of that stuff, I'm sure it
Hmm.
would be a little bit crazier.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it sounds like a little more overwhelming when you just like list it all out there. But then when you're like,
Yeah.
okay, it's only weekly, bi-weekly, once a month, whatever, it's definitely a little easier to digest.
Yeah, I would love to be more active. I mean, you and I obviously love sports, and I don't
Yeah.
even in the gym, so it would be nice to go, 4 or 5 days a week. But then, you do find, I remember when I was in Midland, it was like you'd go to work, you'd come home at like 5:30, you're starving, you make something, you go to the gym later, and you end up with like an hour or two of TV, and then you go to bed.
Right.
So then it's just like, well, where did the time go? And so I find, like maybe the people are going for like a 30-minute walk in their day, or like they're shortening their gym trips, or they're just doing more rigorous exercise a couple days a week. But if you can't do it every single day, I don't blame you, because it just is super time consuming.
Definitely. And I think that like people out of college or, out of school or even just like in our age, like the 20s, there can be a lot of pressure to feel like you have to do so many things all at once, or like you have to, do XYZ activity to like kind of be in with the people in your kind of circumstances. But really it's like whatever you want to do with your time, like just do it. Like it's really important to just prioritize your time, what's best for you, because it's so limited.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, my mom, she'd cook dinner like every single day, right? And so then by the time
Uh-huh.
you graduate, you're like, I'm supposed to cook a meal for myself
Right.
single day. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I hate this.
Yeah.
And so I'm so grateful for like the concept of meal prepping, even if that just gets you like through your lunches during the week. Cause that's to me one of the most frustrating things is you open the fridge and you just stare at it because you're like, I have made, and I just want like something I can pop in the microwave and be done with, instead of, spending an hour and a half on one meal.
Exactly. Yeah, I totally agree with you there. How long have you been doing, like, meal prepping stuff?
Um, well, I've been living on my own. Well, gosh. Okay. So when I graduated in 2019, I did about like 10 months in the office. So I was living on my own then. Then I moved home because of COVID, but I still was like part time in Midland at my apartment. Um, and then I've had my house since like beginning of July. Um,
Okay.
so I've I've been doing it enough. I still am not the best at like nutritional value and like
Sure.
consistently cooking. But just like last week, for example, my fiance and I we cooked together and did two separate meals, and so then we had leftovers from both, and so like he could take half, I could take half of each, and then you're not stuck with like four servings for yourself from one.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So, when it comes to, like, we've talked about, like, the various passions you have, whether it's music or sports, like, when did those involvements come into your life, and how did they?
um well, I started playing guitar when I was 8. I started taking lessons.
Okay.
Since I was little, I probably just like had the rock star dream, like I watched Hannah Montana and stuff like
Yep.
that. Um, so I started then, and then it was when I was like 14, I was a freshman in high school. My guitar teacher at the time was like, I've kind of given you a really solid foundation, and I wasn't big into like being a lead guitarist of like improvising scales and
Mhm.
like creating riffs and that sort of thing. I really just wanted to like play and sing at the same time. And so he was like, you should just go play with other people. And so that was when I auditioned and joined a band and played a classic rock band and did that through high school. And then sports, I mean, I think that's just something like as a kid, like your parents should encourage. Like, don't get me wrong,
Mhm.
you have to play sports if you're the kid that's like a total bookworm or whatever. But we did like kitty kickers as like for soccer when we were like in kindergarten, and then I did cheerleading like second through fourth grade, and then at school like the other sports started in like fifth grade. So that was when I joined volleyball and basketball, and it was always something that I just enjoyed. I've always been competitive, and
Mhm.
I like the teamwork aspect and just the whole concept of like challenging yourself and getting better at it.
Yeah, and now from, like, our time together in undergrad and just from knowing you, I know, like you said, you're very competitive, you're very talented too at, and, various sports, whether it's basketball, volleyball. I feel like any sport that you tried or that I seen you play or I played with you, you were always pretty good at it or you picked up on it pretty quickly.
That's the gift
Um,
of general athleticism, I
there you
think.
go. Yes. But between those 2, like, did you ever have, like, a dream or a desire to do like either sports or music professionally?
Oh, yeah. So when I was in high school, I was gonna get on the varsity basketball team. The coach kind of like recruited over the summer, and so you kind of knew if you were gonna be in or not.
Hmm.
Um, but I had found out that practices were like 6 days a week, and the band that I was in practiced every single Friday. And so then
Mm.
I had to make a choice of, do I pursue music or do I pursue basketball? So I ended up choosing music. I really wanted to go to school for it, but I've always been very logical on my own, but my parents as well. And so we just, you know, your parents, they want you to
Yeah.
set up for success. And so music was just one of those things where I was like, as much as I love it, I knew that like I wasn't going to be a star. Like I never thought that I was bad, but I knew I didn't have like it. And even if you had it, like you had to get lucky somewhere along the
Hmm.
line, or like live in LA or whatever. And so I decided to just pursue business, which I enjoyed as well. I had always liked marketing. And then people always said like, well, why don't you start a band at school and stuff like that? And I was just like, that's not really something that's as easy to find as you think it is. And
Right.
college kids are like super good at like talking it up of like, we should do this and like we should start blah blah, blah, and then like nothing ever comes of it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I can attest to that, whether it's myself or people that I knew in
Yeah.
college. We're very good at talking things up, but not always following through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but Savannah, when you were mentioning like, you had that dream of music and then, you're kind of like, I want to go to school for it, but kind of maybe took more of a, quote unquote practical route, because you didn't really think that music could be, you know,
Mm-hmm.
full-time star opportunity. Was that a tough kind of like moment or realization for you, or was it something that you're just like, logically, I love it, but it doesn't make sense, so I'm just gonna focus more on like business and marketing in my career?
Um, Yeah, I mean, I think it was a hard decision emotionally, but I think
Hmm.
I knew deep down that like that wasn't a leap that I could take. I did want the security, and I think I just, maybe being in the band helped of like there it was kind of like a School of Rock type deal where this guy
Okay.
started it with his kids and then carried it on as a nonprofit throughout the years. And so there was like three groups, ages like 8 to 18 in the band. And so you have a lot of singers and you have a lot of guitarists that you're kind of like competing against all the time. And so I
Hmm.
think that kind of helped me realize my own skill set and what I was capable of. Um, and then I think where it got hard emotionally is just, well, how am I going to pursue this on the side? Like what am I going to do with this? Um and I think um it's still something that I wish I was more active with, but music is one of those things that I struggle to just like play on my own. Like I loved performing. I loved the assignment of like, these are the songs we're learning this week and like that sort of thing. And so I've never been the type to just like fiddle around on my own. And
Hmm.
so like throughout the years I've played at church, or um occasionally like you'll have a friend that's like, oh, I like really want to hear you play or something like that. And that's fun, but I've never taken it any further of like starting another band or like gigging at like a local pub or something like that.
Do you think that either gigging or maybe even a band are things that you might consider doing someday in the future?
Um, I think a band, gigging on my own, I think I'm too afraid of like them saying you're not good enough to be hired. And so it's kind of nice when like you get your friends or like people at church,
Hmm.
something that like compliment you and you're like, oh, that feels so good, but like you're not ready to like put yourself out there for somebody to
Sure.
pay you to do it.
It's interesting to hear you say that because in all the time that I've known you, I feel like I could say that you're one of the most confident people that I know.
Yeah.
And to hear you say that, like, there is that maybe little like, like, I don't know if I'd be good enough kinda, thought, like, to me, it's like, wow, like, you're human. All this time I thought you're, like,
Oh.
a robot because you're just super, like, confident and you're just very talented at a lot of things, whether it's academics or, those hobbies that we've talked about. So, I think that's just an interesting perspective to, like, just anyone listening to know that, like, even if you think that everyone has it all together or that they are the most confident person in the world, like, yes, probably are to an extent, but there's also probably that, like, internal doubt or just, like, imposter syndrome that everyone faces at some
Oh,
extent.
yeah, I mean, I would say I'm fairly confident, like, I've described myself that way, like,
Yeah.
you, like, a lot of people have, but I think it's more confidence in, like, the reality of like where I stand with things. Like I'm very self-aware, and so I think I know what I bring to the table and what I also don't bring to the table. And so like that's that's kind of where that confidence comes, where like with sports, like, oh my gosh, when I was in school, like I was always stressed out about it. Like I was always trying to be better, and then I was upset like if I didn't get that much playing time or I wasn't as good as the other people. And so that desire to like really be a standout was there. Like I never felt like there were some kids that I was just like, man, they're so good and they don't even try. Like I tried
Mhm.
so hard and like I'm still like 50% as skilled as them. And so I think that that feeling is still there, but I think there's a level of confidence that can come just from like, I know what I'm equipped with and I know what I'm not.
Yeah. And you mentioned, like, having that self-awareness and that you yourself are a very self-aware person. Has that been something that has just always kind of been intuitive for you, or is that something that you've had to, like, work on and grow throughout the years?
Um, I think, oh, that's a really good question. There's probably a part of that that is very natural for me. I think it's a tendency that I have. I mean, I've always been a talker. I've always been I mean, when I was 3 years old, my mom's adult friends said that they felt like they could have an adult conversation with me, and I was a child. And so I think that's always been there, but I've gotten more aware, I would say, like, in the last couple years, specifically because I had started going to counseling, and so
Mm,
there was um, a lot of awareness that came with, like, processing things. So, I might have been able to, like, articulate an emotion before, but I wouldn't have been able to understand completely where it's coming from or, like, what's getting triggered or, like, what the wound is or something like that. And so, that's been, I would say, like, helpful in my maturity of just being able to, like, understand myself more and empathize with other people that might also be trying to like process through things.
yeah, that is a really good point. I think that the processing in general is a lot to have to do and to unpack things from our experiences, childhood,
Mhm.
current situations, and stuff like that. So I think if you can sit back and do that, whether that is on your own with, a friend or family member, with a mental health professional, I think that that's when you can kind of become more self-aware and see kind of tendencies that you have or the way that you feel situations or about certain circumstances.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely. So I know that something that you've mentioned kind of like when you're introducing yourself and with your Etsy shop as well, your faith and religion is something that you've always valued and that's always been important to you. Um, has that just been something that like was that just like based on how you were raised?
Um, I mean, I think most kids probably right if they're raised in the faith, like there is
Hmm.
an element of when you're growing up, I'm doing this because my parents are teaching me to do this. And I think that like right on your parents, if they believe that like this is a great way to raise you, then kids need that nurturing, they need that guidance.
Hmm.
But I think as an adult you do realize that your faith has to be your own. And
Right.
so I did I don't think I've ever doubted it so much where I've considered leaving my faith. Like what my what I instilled what was instilled in myself in childhood has always remained. And so I pursued my faith in high school and I pursued it in college, but there were levels of it that were very just like formulaic of
Mhm.
I go to church on Sunday because like that's what the rule is, and I do these things because that's what's expected of me. And it came, I think, without me even realizing it, there was this deep feeling of like, I'm pursuing this because I don't want to go to hell. Where
Mhm.
when I was in college, I think I started to realize that there were people that were pursuing faith not out of fear of anything, but because they just believed in like this amazing love of Jesus. And so that when I saw that in other people, I was like, well, what is that? Like, what's a relationship with Jesus look like? Like, what is pursuing faith out of like joy and just like wanting to desire that versus like being afraid of doing something wrong. And so that's when I think college kind of kicked off, like me really pursuing it on my own. And then especially when I moved to Midland, I had a really hard time transitioning out of college, to be totally honest. I moved to a new place. I was living by myself. I had no friends. I had never been in a 9 to 5 workforce. Like everything was new to me. And so my friend Anna, who I met, she challenged both of us to a year long prayer challenge. And the goal was to get to like 40 minutes of prayer a day. And I was the type of person that only prayed to God when I needed something, or
Yeah.
like, maybe grace before meals or like at mass, but it wasn't ever super consistent. And I would say, like, honestly, like, thanks to her and like that challenge, that really kickstarted a lot more in me. And ever since then, like, it's just been something I've pursued like so much more strongly than I ever did growing up.
That is really interesting to hear about because, yeah, I think when I think back to the time, like when I first met you and just knowing you in college, I knew that, faith was important to you. It was something that you practiced. It's something that certainly even like we've had brief conversations about and everything. But to kind of hear the journey that you've taken and how like that post college transition is kind of when maybe you got a little deeper into your own faith and your own beliefs. I think that that's just really interesting perspective. And it sounds like I think that, like, through that challenge, that year prayer challenge you mentioned, like, it just kind of helped you just build that relationship and see what it actually means to you and why you do value it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, like, and I think this happens to a lot of people and like what they end up pursuing afterwards, you know, it varies, but there's something about like when you finally get out of the system of schooling that you ask yourself, like, what is the point of life? Um,
Mhm.
like what's the meaning? Like, why am I here? Like, just so many things. And some people aren't very deep thinkers, like they don't go into that existential realm. I did, and I went in like very deep, and that's actually why I started going to counseling, because I was having a hard time with it. But I got to the point where for me, life doesn't make sense and life doesn't have value if I don't have God. And so, in a weird way, like hitting that rock bottom of confusion and just like asking all of these questions, I think ultimately gave me the foundation of like, I know with complete certainty what I believe and why I believe it. And so I can pursue it on my own. And even though faith is hard, like it's never completely easy, and the waves will hit. Um, it's not it's not in the same way as, somebody that's like trying to understand like from the very beginning of like, what do I believe? Do I believe only because my parents told me to, or is this something that I also agree with?
Yeah, and I think that that's good perspective that you kind of when you hit, like, rock bottom, that's when it really kind of forced you to look inside and to question these things and to have this kind of growth that you've experienced, and I think that it's, like, obviously, like, as your friend, I'm not like happy to hear that you hit rock bottom or that you were
Oh,
struggling
sure.
or that things were tough. But at the same time, it's like being able to have the perspective that there can be good that comes out of even the worst of times and just to kind of persevere and to just not be afraid of growth and just knowing that like even if things like completely suck today, that doesn't mean they always will.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't have growth, we're just stagnant, right? And like change
Exactly.
is very exciting.
Right. Exactly. And it sounds like I mean, just that transitionary period of coming out of undergrad, even though it was tough for you, like you did grow a lot. And just, I mean, since then to now, like I'm sure you could look back at yourself and say, like, I'm a completely different person than you
Oh,
were then that you are now.
for sure, but I also wish that people would have talked about what that transition was like because I felt
Yeah.
so blindsided after graduating. And maybe other people have a great time, like with the kids that I hung out with, it was like, how is nobody else, struggling? But I think the reality is most of young adults are probably super confused, but nobody talks about it. And so they just continue to go through the motions of like, these are the things that I think I'm supposed to be doing. And nobody's told me otherwise.
Oh my gosh. Yes, 100%. That was the exact same experience that I had. And I mean, even to this day, I still feel that. I mean, being, 26 and kind of having an idea, but also kind of not having an idea what I'm doing
Mm.
with my life. Like, it's just so much of this time, like, honestly, your 20s, I'd imagine your whole 20s, like, it's just not really talked about outside of like, oh, like, maybe you go to college, you graduate, you know, you make lifelong friends in college that you keep in touch with. You maybe drift away from some friends. Maybe you get married, you have kids, your friends get married, have kids, whatever. You buy a house. Like I feel like that's what people talk about in their about
Mhm.
like their 20s, but there's so much more that goes unnoticed or that like you said we struggle with, but like we don't normalize that conversation. So we're just kind of all like barely afloat, but no one wants to say anything about it.
Well, I mean, like, nobody ever talked about, like, sometimes professors would say, like, when you get into the real world, like, there aren't grades and, like, you need to, like, fend for yourself and kind of a thing. But nobody ever talked about, like, what it's like to be a a try hard student, for lack of a better word, and caring about grades and like receiving this constant validation that you don't even realize you're receiving. And then to get into the workforce where you're like, maybe I have a deadline, but I don't really get graded on the work that
Hmm.
I do. And if, and like at any point, they could hire anybody else to do my job. Like, in college, I felt like a very big fish in a small pond. And when I got out and I was at Dow, which is a giant company, it was like now I'm this tiny fish in this big pond and I'm replaceable. And nobody ever talks about that. And then
Yeah.
it hits you and you're like, why did like were people afraid to warn me? Like they didn't want to hurt my feelings because I wish that I would have known that this was coming.
Yeah, that is very true, and I mean, I think it's just tough with, like, something that it didn't really hit like, it's obvious, but it didn't hit me until, a year or 2 after college. It's like, we spend our whole pretty much existence in school, right? From,
Yeah,
like, preschool, elementary,
like
middle, high
what,
school.
8 years, something like that. You start at like age 5, you're maybe
Yeah,
22, 23 when you graduate. Yeah.
exactly, so it's like, when you're no longer a student, like, you're just completely stripped of, honestly, your identity. Like,
Yeah, because
you're you
whole
know?
life up until that point has been school.
Exactly. And that in itself is just it's hard. I mean, like, think about if you were, you know, working a job and you're with the same company doing the same job for like 20 years and then suddenly you stopped. It's like it's the same thing except just you're in school instead.
Yeah, and so it's like, they probably don't emphasize it because they're like so much of your life is outside of school, but I'm like that's exactly why. School might be a tiny blip in the lifespan that you have, but when you're graduating, you're like that's all I've known. And so
Mhm.
can we talk about what that transition really looks like? And I mean, I was still like an hour and a half from home. Like I can't even imagine if I took a job like out in California or something like that and I was no longer by family or any friends. Or there's a difference between if you take a job at like a super small company versus a really big company. And there are just things where like I think the emotional transition is just very much disregarded.
I agree. Yeah, I definitely think it is. And even just like from my experiences of what I finished undergrad, I was I think like 22 when I graduated,
Hmm.
and then I went back to grad school at 24. So from 22 to 24, I was working, and then went back to grad school and graduated at 26. Like even going back to grad school at 24, like I felt such like I felt so comfortable because it was like, okay, this is school. I know school. I know how school works. Like you said, I'm getting that validation from, you know, exams, papers, whatever. Like I'm not gonna say I was like, you know, the best, smartest student, but I did well. I did well enough in college and stuff where it's like I usually did get that kind of like confirmation that like I'm smart, I'm good at something, you know, I know what I'm doing, whatever. So even just like knowing that I was going back to that, like there was just so much more comfort than anything I experienced from 22 to 24. Like that was just a mystery. My mind's going at 1,000 miles an hour. But right when I went back to school, I was like, okay, life makes sense again.
So was that easier for you to go back? Because I feel like everybody says once you're done with school, like you better continue with grad school or you're not
hmm
never go back.
Yeah, so that's I was afraid honestly. Like when I made the decision to go back to grad school, I was worried. I was like, I haven't been in school for 2 years. Do I even know how to study? Like, can I sit through a lecture?
Right.
What's that going to be like? Or like even just like the in the grand scheme, I'm not old, but like I felt like, oh, I'm older
Yeah.
than these people that are going
Well,
straight out of undergrad.
I'm a fan for sure. So I
Right.
understand that.
For sure. So like I had those thoughts, but like I think looking back on my time, having the 2 years out of school helped me just understand myself, understand life. It gave me a higher level of maturity and self-awareness. And then also I think from like an academic standpoint, just like going from like, okay, I'm learning something in a classroom, but now I can actually see because I can tell you how
Oh,
that like lesson actually works in the real world. Or like I have that real world knowledge. So I think it was helpful. I think it was definitely intimidating when I was first going back into it, but I think I'm glad that I did it the way that I did. But I could see definitely the benefits to just like going straight through and not having the time off.
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it gives you a little bit more perspective and maybe some more motivation of like, not only do I see how this applies, but I can see how this lesson is going to make my out of work experience more valuable later on.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly how I saw it. And I mean, this might not be like the best mindset to have, but like when I went back to or when I went back to grad school, I kind of just had the mentality of like I'm just here to learn, get a piece of paper and further myself in my career. And it wasn't really so much as like I want the experience or I need the experience of being back in
Oh,
college or
yeah.
getting my master's. It's just like I just know that this is going to help me with my future. And I mean, at the time when I was going into grad school, I wasn't that happy with my life and my situation and my career outlook. So it was kind of like I need to do this to put myself in the position that I want to be in.
Well, that's interesting because then it's like, what are you doing in terms of a social life at that time, right? Because you're like
Yeah.
one foot in, one foot out. Um,
hmm
so I could see how it would help you focus on school, but then it's also like, where are you building community at that time?
Yeah, that's a good point. And when I started grad school, I started um August of 2020. So,
Oh, okay. So virtual.
yeah, so it was virtual for me, and that was also community really wasn't a thing as easily, I guess you could
Yeah.
say, because of the pandemic and everything. And at this time, like when I went into grad school, I was living by myself up in Mount Pleasant. I was doing everything online. I just I because of like taking the 2 years off between undergrad and grad school, I didn't really know anyone that was still at Central. Like I didn't have many
Yeah.
friends from undergrad still up
That
there.
must have been so hard. I'm so sorry.
No, no, it's okay. So it was definitely tough. And I think like for me, it was like, oh, like it's gonna be fine. Like, whatever. I have my friends back home or my friends that, childhood friends, undergrad friends that I'll just text or call or we'll Zoom or whatever. But then I think like you kind of brought up, like you eventually get to the point where you're like, I don't have community and I don't
Uh,
have, like it wasn't like undergrad how I could just walk down the hall to your room and say like, hey, let's go play
yeah.
basketball or like let's play some music or something. Like just people weren't really doing that. And then even though I said like it like having the age difference like kind of helped me with perspective, it also was kind of weird for me to think like everyone surrounding me right now is like 18 or like
Uh,
19 and like I just feel so old. So it definitely was one of those tricky things. And I think that like kind of going through the 2 years of grad school not having much of community and not really having much of a social kind of network, coming out of it, I've learned, like, how important it is and how just you need to take that time and find those involvements or find those kind of things that you can do to build a community within.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% that, like, you need to take that seriously because,
Mhm.
like, when I moved to Midland, I got stuck in, like, obviously it wasn't COVID, so there were people at like available to me, but it was one of those things where it was the first time that I felt like my friends were really only my friends because I didn't have other options. And that sounds so bad, but like the a lot of the people that I was at work with were because there wasn't a ton of people that were my age, and so the
Right.
people in the IT rotational program, a lot of them were still transitioning out of like the party phase of college, and so they still like wanted to drink on the weekends, and sometimes it's just hard to find people that like you really have a connection with, but you also don't want to be alone. And so
Right.
I found that really hard of like the last thing I wanted was to just be in my apartment alone with my thoughts. And so I was like, well, I'm going to hang out with these people. But then when I finally moved home and I made more like friends that I was actually choosing to be my friends, it was like, wow, like you realize how valuable it is to like find people that you have true connections with and like authentic community. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like I'm glad that I had people there and that some of them were able to form those bonds, but it was a weird experience feeling like I'm friends with these people because I don't really have anybody else.
Right, and I mean, on that topic, like, I think that's another thing that people don't really talk about, like, once you're out of college, like, it's so weird and hard to make new friends.
Hmm.
I mean, like you said, just, like, with maybe people that might be similar to your age, it's like there's just so many people are in such different phases where it's like, you just don't know kind of, like, where you fit in, you're trying to figure that out, and then also, like, if you go right into the workforce, there's probably a good chance a lot of people you work with are much different phases of life, different
So
in
much older
age.
than you. Yeah.
Exactly.
I know.
Yeah.
So like I made a couple friends. These ladies are old enough to be my mom, and
Right.
they'll be invited to my wedding, like believe it or not, because I got close with them. But like that's weird because you're like, I can't hang out with these people outside of work. Like
Exactly.
they're too old and they have kids and husbands and like this just doesn't work. But then it's like, well, I have like 10 people to pick from or 20 people or whatever. Where at college, you're like, it feels different in the sense
Yeah.
of like, yes, obviously, like you're stuck with the people that are around you. Like you have to choose from the people you're meeting, but there's so many people to meet. So
Exactly.
you can at least say, okay, well, like we have a connection. Not just like, well, this person's in my class and they sit next to me, so, like I guess they'll be my butt.
Right. Yeah, for sure, and now when you got back home and everything, like, you said that you're kind of just putting more time and energy and maybe intentionality behind those connections and making friends and finding kind of your community. Were there specific things that you did that helped you kind of find that?
Yeah, so there were like by the time that I got out of Midland, there were a couple friends that I would say I was really close with. Um, that I had started actually a church group up there because I would realized I was like, okay, the people that I'm at work with just like aren't in the same phase as me and we don't have the same values and passions. And so I was like, I gotta get involved some other way. And so I was doing that and I made a couple friends there that I'm still friends with now. And then when I got home, the same thing kind of happened. It was really weird and people thought I was crazy, but I kept my apartment in Midland. I had because I didn't know if I was going to go back to the office. And so everybody was like, "Why are you paying rent if you're not living there?" And I was like, "Okay, well, imagine that like I'm paying rent to live at my parents and just like imagine I don't have that place. Like either way I'm paying rent to live somewhere." Um and so I wasn't paying rent at my parents, but I was paying rent there and I would visit. I would do like 3 or 4 days a week in Midland and the rest of the time at home because my parents were like, that transition was so hard for you. Like, you have to keep living on your own to a certain extent, or you're just going to struggle when you move out again. And so it was kind of this like back and forth. And then I just got more and more, I was spending more and more time at home. And my mom actually, there was a lady from church that reached out to her because I think my mom had mentioned, like, oh, Savannah's started a young adult group before. And they were like, oh, well, we could use her help because they're trying to start one here at our church.
Mhm.
And so that was when I was like, I told them straight up, I was like, I'll help you start it because I know what I'm doing, but I'm moving back to Midland at some point. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to be a part of this. Well, joke's on me because it's been like way longer and now I help lead the group and stuff. But really how I met people. We tend to get like anywhere from like 15 to like 30 young adults at each of our events. And so, and there's like other things like there's Detroit Catholic Young Adults and there's Detroit Catholic Young Professionals. And there's like so many different young adult groups in the Metro Detroit area that if you want to meet people, there are opportunities for you.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear about. I mean, it's honestly something that I'm not too knowledgeable or familiar with, so it's nice to know that there are those, like, kind of young adult groups, and I think kind of, like, the whole theme of this conversation we've been having is just, like, being in that young adult phase, like, it's a lot, and it's confusing, and it's tough. So, if there are other people in that same situation or that, are having the same thoughts or just, like, questioning the same things that you are, like, it's cool to know that there are a lot of communities near you, especially, like, in our area.
I mean, like, obviously, I'm talking specifically, like, in representing Catholics, but I'm sure,
Right.
like, other churches, like, of different denominations do that, and then I'm sure, like, I think Midland actually had, like, a Midland Young Professionals group, and so I'm sure that there's, like, young professionals groups in other towns that, like, aren't
Mhm.
religious affiliation, and then, like, Jason and I, my fiancé, we met at pickup volleyball, actually. It was, I'm not even sure how I found it. I think a friend of mine on Facebook like was in the group and so it popped up in like my recommended groups.
Yeah.
And it was young adult pickup volleyball at Romeo Middle School. And granted, a lot of the adult, or sorry, it wasn't young adult, but it's co-ed. And a lot of the adults that go are like, I don't know, like men and like 50 years old and up. But you do get like some young adults, you get varying ages depending on what location you're at. And that was where I met him. And I mean, I was just going because I wanted volleyball. I didn't want to be lifting weights all the time.
Right.
And we have a group of friends, like we'll do an occasional game night and they're all the volleyball gang. And so I think if you're into sports, like I would definitely suggest trying to find um, rec centers or like different things on Facebook that are available just to like go out and meet people. Cause like who wants to meet people at a bar, like
Right.
especially if you're looking for friends and not a relationship.
Yeah. 100%, and I know that, like, from knowing you that I would, classify you as a very social person and definitely outgoing, maybe when you wanna be, but I think in general you're an outgoing person and everything, so like, for me, hear you kind of talk about your experiences and everything, it's like, I'm not really surprised that you're able to kinda put yourself out there and, find community and go to these, like, pick up volleyball and just events and everything. But was it always easy for you, or did you have moments where you're, like, kind of, like, nervous to do it, or you're like, "Ah, like, I
Uh,
don't know, maybe I shouldn't."
Yeah, yeah, so I mean, I think I definitely have the same tendency of, like, you wanna go with somebody, and
Yeah.
so if I had a friend that I could bring along to something, I would. Volleyball wasn't that case for me. Most of the girls that I'm friends with aren't, athletic like that, or, like, maybe they'll, like, play pickup, but, like, they're not competitive about it, and
Mhm.
I mean, competitive people don't always get along with the people
Right?
that play for fun. Um, and so it was more out of just like desperation for me of like,
Yeah.
I want exercise. It's good for my mental health. It's good for my physical health. Like, I got to get like some of this stress out. I love volleyball. Like, I coached in Midland. I coached at St. Joe's this past season. Like, it's just something that I really wanted to do. And so I was like, I'm going to suck it up and I'm going to go and I'm going to play. And I was like, I'm not even going to talk to anybody. Like, I'm not here to make friends. Like, I just want to like,
Mhm.
play volleyball. And then eventually, I think just like anybody, you like kind of suss out the people there,
Yeah.
like a comment or two, and like kind of start conversation. And then eventually you'll make some friends.
For sure, yeah, and I think it's just, like, that idea of, like, step out of your comfort zone, especially step out of your comfort zone if it's something that you love and or that you have a passion for. So like you were saying, you loved volleyball, you wanted to do something active and be competitive and participate in a sport. And even though, like you said, like it was out of desperation, it was like it still took you to step out of your comfort zone to do so. So I
Yeah,
think it's
well,
like
I'm nobody wants you to
right,
complain about not having friends and like having nothing to do all the time.
yeah,
And so like it's one of those things where I totally understand it's difficult, but if you're miserable and like you want to have more involvement, then like you have to step out of your comfort zone. And so what
exactly.
that means forcing somebody to come along with you just out of moral support or like doing it on your own, like the only way you're going to change it is if you take that step.
Yeah, definitely. It's important to take it, and I know it's not always easy, but, like, it's important and really, like it's kind of one of those things of, like, you can't really expect anything in your situation to change if you're not, willing to do something to make that change, so, like, take that first step.
Yeah, and then if you're the person that does take the first step, then maybe you'll get to be an advocate for somebody else and be like,
Mhm.
"Oh, like you play sports too? Like you should come along with me. Like I play Wednesday nights or whatever." Or
Yeah,
like I'm in this league, like would you want to join with me or something? And then yes, like you had to do the tough work on your own, but it's really nice to be able to like offer that suggestion to somebody else so they don't have to just like figure it out on their own.
exactly, yeah, kind of just, like, paying it forward and helping
Mhm.
someone else that is in a situation that, you were at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I know that, we've talked a little bit about kind of your experiences with your faith and everything. And something that you said earlier that kind of resonated with me is just like the idea that I feel like a lot of us, and me included, like it's almost like when you pray or when you participate in prayer, it's like when something's going wrong or when you feel like you need to ask for help. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se, but I think it's just like religion and faith can be tough and it can be intimidating and it could be something that could be overwhelming to some folks. So I was just wondering, like, do you have any advice to people who maybe they want to get involved, whether it is with their local, church or a local church or just with their own faith? Like, do you have any suggestions or advice for anyone who's kind of feeling a little overwhelmed but wants to get involved?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of churches, and I assume that this is not just Catholic churches, but they have bulletins or like,
Hmm.
they're like weekly pamphlets of like things that are going on. And when I moved to Midland, actually, I drove to churches and like picked them up or like found their websites online if they like have them loaded there. And so I think that's a good starting place of just to see like there's different things on there, like maybe there's an event that you could go to or maybe there's a contact information of like want to join the young adult group, contact so and so, or like want to help out with youth group or like something like that. So I think that's a good way of getting started. Sometimes there's Facebook groups that exist for groups like that as well. But then when it comes to like faith as a whole, like I know you mentioned like that awkwardness of prayer. um,
Hmm.
I think part of it is when you first get started, it will feel like you're talking to a brick wall. And I think, like, even now, like being stronger and more consistent in my faith, there are times it still feels like that. But the only way that that feeling ever changes is if you put in that work. And so, like, don't feel like because it's awkward and it feels like he's not talking back, that like nothing's happening. Um, Sometimes that's just like part of the process. And I mean, you have to be silent too, like if all you're doing is talking, like obviously you're not going to hear anything. um and hearing being a general word of like not hearing him talk to you from the sky, but like not feeling anything or not
Hmm.
a thought that pops into your head of like, oh, where'd that come from, like maybe like he's trying to tell me something. Um and I think also trying to, I mean, I've heard this growing up forever, but I think it really is true that, like, if you think of Jesus as a friend that helps you understand of how you're supposed to talk to him, or even as a parent, I guess you kind of should choose depending on what your relationship with your family looks like. But
Right.
if if you think of, maybe you have your mom or your dad or like somebody that you consider like a parent, you might go to them a lot of the time when you need them, but you're also going to update them on like the big things that are happening in your life. And like, you're going to come to them like when you're really happy about something or when you have a question about something. And so, the same thing happens with God, or like when you go to your best friend, or like, maybe you're dating somebody and like you're texting them all the time and you're calling them. Like, Jason knows like every detail of my life, I feel like some days. Like, that's like what God wants you to do as well. So like,
Right.
he sees everything, he hears everything, but he just wants communication. And so I think sometimes we just like really overcomplicate it, of like, I have to say like this specific prayer, and like I can't offend him or like anything like that. And it's like, no, I mean, he already knows literally everything you're thinking that you say to people, anyways. Like, the only difference is he wants you to talk to him and not
Mhm.
just other people.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you were saying that, something that I thought of is like, you know, we try to be perfect and we want to be
Mm.
perfect within our faith, but like I think at the end of the day, like one of the root things about like like having faith and believing in God or a God or Jesus is that like he knows that you're not perfect. And
Yeah,
that's okay. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to be perfect, but we want to be, but like we just need to be ourselves.
right. Because I mean, think about it. Like, if you go to a confidant or a counselor or whatever, like, you don't just like show them the nice things, or like even
Right.
it's like you air out your dirty laundry. And why would you not do that to the God that sees it all anyways? Like,
Right.
there's literally nothing you could hide from him. And so I've heard people tell me before of like, you can tell God, like he can take it. Like, if you're mad at him, like tell him you're mad. Like, you're not going to offend him because he already knows you're pissed off anyways.
Right.
So the only way that he's going to work in your heart emotionally is if you open up your heart to him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, exactly. Like you said, it's not like there's anything that you could keep or hide. So just let it all out and just know that like that's okay and that's encouraged and that's what he wants too.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes I think a good way to start, because people are like, "I don't even know how to pray." I'm like,
Yeah.
tell him that. Exactly. Be like, "I don't know how to pray. I don't know what I'm doing. So like, I'm just going to try and have this conversation to you, and like have the conversation like in your head or like in your bedroom or whatever, and just like pretend you're talking to a wall." And like that's kind of how it starts. Like, it feels weird, but like, if you can be like as open and honest as just saying like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but like I'm here and I'm trying.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's great advice on like kind of your first steps you can take and, kind of branching off of your faith and everything,
Mhm.
going towards like the Etsy store that you started. I know you said it's kind of just like something, it's a hobby, something you do in your free time, but really like what was the inspiration behind it or, what made you want to go ahead and start that?
Yeah, so I mean, this is I mean, it is Catholic centric. You don't have to be Catholic to buy it, but it is like more formatted to like the rosary or like chaplets and things like that. And so I follow like different Instagram accounts where like I see these people making this stuff, and I was like, well, I'm pretty sure I could do it. And like, I wonder if I could sell it for cheaper. Uh,
Yeah.
and I had some boredom at work. Like, there were just times where I was like, I'm sitting at my desk and I'm just like watching YouTube TV. Like, I'm not actually doing anything. And so, I was like, why not do this? And like, worst case, like, I'm not like stocking up a ton and like really thinking that it's going to be successful. I've sold just like a few things. Like, my roommate had bought one, and like a friend of mine reached out asking for like a custom one for his girlfriend for Valentine's Day, and things like that. But for the most part, it was just like, this is something for me to do, and I'm gonna see like if I can get anywhere from it. And I totally realized like it's a smaller market. Like, I don't have that many offerings, and like it is Catholic focused, but the way that I see it is like, if you have a skill set that you think you can do and you can make a little bit of like money on the side for it, and you just enjoy doing it, then like, why not?
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's important, and I think, like, where some people can get tripped up in general is like when you do something with the whole like I need to make money, I need to be rich, I need to make this my full-time job. Like when you have that mentality, I feel like you almost set yourself up for failure. But when it's like I enjoy doing this, it's fun, maybe I might make something out of it, who knows? Like I think that's
Yeah.
when there's like less pressure and you just can fully enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like two things in that. One, like don't like stock up and like spend all this money like think
Yeah,
it would be a success before you know. But then I think the thing for me is like I have a job that pays well. Like I don't need this extra money right now. And
right,
that's what I'd encourage is like, and granted, I'm by no means like a seasoned entrepreneur or anything,
right.
but I think that like even if you watch Shark Tank, right? Like a lot of those people that go on the show are they have their full-time job, they start this side thing, any success from it, and by the time that it starts to be successful, then they say, "Okay, can I transition, quit my job and do this full time?" And
Yeah,
so like, if you go with this mentality of like, I would love to be a full-time entrepreneur, but I need to see if this is going to pan out first, then that's a really practical way of doing it.
would you say that is your mentality or that has been that you like if it works out, that'd be awesome, but like you're not really attached to that happening?
Oh gosh, I by no means think that I could do like this as a full-time thing. Like I just
Okay.
the market of what I'm making is big like that. So this is definitely just a hobby for me of like some little side money. I was like, if I could stock up a little bit, that
Yeah.
like might pay for like this little bit of my wedding or like maybe I
Right.
shoes or like something like that. But I think the same mentality applies if they're looking at like a bigger scale entrepreneurship thing of like don't go into it just assuming that like you're going
Right.
to scale it because you don't want to set yourself up and then fail and then have no money to support yourself.
For sure. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, everyone says, take the leap and, just you gotta go for broke. And like, yeah, I understand that. But at the same time, like you have to be practical and logical and you have to understand that like there's a lot of risk and things like that. So just kind of being prepared and
Yeah,
knowing what you're getting yourself into.
I think like the go for broke mentality, sure, in your free time. Like
Yeah.
do your job and then spend all of your free time pursuing that passion of yours 100%. But I don't think you should ever like unless you have like valid proof of like this could be successful, I don't think entrepreneurship is a good thing to be one foot in, one foot out for.
Yeah. I agree. I think that that's exactly the case, and I mean, even just for transparency to anyone listening, like that's where this whole podcast idea came from, and like how that's working. It's like I'm well, I mean, I guess I was in school when I started, but I was a full-time student and I was working, and now I'm working full time. So it's like that was always the priority. That was always like how I'm surviving and everything. But this is like in my free time, I'm going, quote unquote, all in and putting all my time into this passion. So, you know, I wouldn't say I have proof of concept yet. Like I don't know that it's this is something that I could do long term, but I'm having fun with it, and if it turns out to be great, but if not, like I'm having fun. That's all that matters.
Yeah. But if there's any serious entrepreneur listening that fully disagrees with us, totally fine.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. Like if you do
that's part
disagree,
of
like please let us know, or
yeah.
please reach out and you can come on and be a guest and we can talk
I
about
never
how we're
said
wrong.
entrepreneurship, so I have no idea. I just know that I would not feel comfortable like going for broke and if I wasn't certain I could make it happen.
Right. No, for sure. I agree, and I'm in the same camp. And you mentioned Shark Tank, so I'm sure anyone that is like a
Love
shark on Shark Tank would like say like, no, you guys are stupid. Like you got to go for broke, and
yeah.
like you got to sleep like on the floor of your
Well, it's
friend's
interesting.
apartment and
I've seen
whatnot.
them argue on that show about this. Like
Okay.
Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, will be I don't want to hire you if you're not all in and
Yeah.
your full-time job. And then sometimes the other sharks will be like, absolutely not. Like they have a family they need to support. Like they cannot be doing this full time. Like that's why they're here is because they need investors to be able to do that.
Exactly. And I want to say that it's kind of jokingly, but I also could see it being serious. But I definitely could think of episodes where like Kevin will say like to like a freshman in college or like a senior in high school, like, are you dropping out? Like, what are you doing? Are you
Right.
gonna do this full time? So I hope he's joking. I think he kind of is, but at the same time, like, who knows?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person. Like Mark
Right.
Cuban would be like, absolutely don't drop out of school. But then there are some people that are like, education's a waste. Like you don't need it.
Yeah.
So um yeah, that's a whole different topic, but to each their.
Right. Exactly. Teach their own. And I think that there's not, a right or wrong. It's just whatever is best for you and your situation. But I certainly think that I'm on the same wavelength with you on these topics.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, um, Savannah, to anyone that's listening who might be interested in checking out your store, is it, do you just have that one like Etsy link to get to it, or like do you have like a website or anything for it or socials
Um,
for it?
it's on my Instagram, like in my bio, but that's just
Okay.
personal Instagram. I haven't created a separate account for it. But yeah, it is the Common Catholic for Etsy. Again, because it's so new and like there's not a ton of purchases or reviews, I know Etsy has like an algorithm, so I don't know how easy it is to search yet. Um but it is linked out there. And then if anyone happens to be like in the Lake Orion, Oxford, Clarkston, Rochester area, the Paint Creek Catholic Young Adults is the young adult group at church that I help lead. We do a lot of fun events too, so if you're like not sure where you're at with your faith yet, but want to come along and just like meet people of like solid, like wholesome values, we try to host one or two events a month as well.
Okay, perfect. And I will I'll find the link. I know you said it's linked in your Instagram. I'll go grab it and I'll put it in the description and the name of your young adult group and everything and kind of like the location you're in. So if anyone's listening and wants to check out either, that will be in the description of this episode. Go down there and check it out. But yeah, it's been a great conversation. Is there any like last thoughts or message that you want to give to anyone listening?
Um, no, I don't think so. It's been so nice talking to you. It's been forever. So, I mean, I appreciate you having me on. I know it was a little bit more one-sided, but I think it's cool. I think it's great that you're passionate about just talking to people and hosting a podcast like this. And I just think it's cool. It kind of reminds me of like a Humans of New York type
Yeah.
deal. Yeah, of just like being interested in like the diversity of people, and I think that's great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all the kind words and the support and everything. And yeah, it's been way too long, so I'm glad that we could catch up, and I'm sure that we'll catch up not on a podcast as well
Yeah,
in the near future. Especially now with you back like in the Metro Detroit area with me. So we'll definitely have to figure some stuff out. But no, it's been a really good conversation. I appreciate you just coming on and sharing your experiences and your thoughts on so many different topics. And it's cool to know that like even years outside of college, years outside of like the last time we were like physically together at the same place, like just that things are going well for you, and that I'm just happy for everything that's going on in your life and all the excitement. Congratulations again on the
you
engagement,
know.
and I'm just excited for your future and to see what you continue to do. And I'll always be here to support you. So I can't wait to find out what all that looks like.
Well, thanks a lot.
Of
I'm
course.
glad things are going well for you too. Congrats on grad school, finishing that. And maybe we'll meet again on the basketball court.
Let's do it. We'll make it happen. All right. Awesome. Thanks, Savannah.
Yep, thanks.